Hello, everybody. Welcome to our X Space today. As people join in, I will just start by testing everybody's microphone, and then we will move into the usual housekeeping. So today we're unpacking day one of the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, which was last night, and then we will look ahead to the key moments that'll happen this week. So first off, Evan, our publisher here at G0, who will moderate today's session. Evan, let's test your microphone.
Hi, Emily, it's Evan. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Great. Sounds loud and clear. Thanks so much, Evan. And I see Lindsay Newman, who's a columnist for us at G0, and she writes the Views on America column that you may have seen in our newsletter. Lindsay, could we test your microphone briefly?
Hi, can you hear me? Good to be here.
Great, we can hear you. Perfect. And I see that John Haltewanger is here, and John is on the ground at the DNC. So we're looking forward to having his perspective from the ground. John, I've just sent you a speaker invitation, but I feel like we might be having a glitch here. If you can hear me, please say something. All right. And I see you're a speaker now, John.
Try it again, John.
Good morning.
Great. I can hear you loud and clear. And we've also got Alex Gibson, who is part of the team that produces our G0 World TV show. And Alex is also on the ground in Chicago. Alex, can we test your mic?
Hey there. Glad to be here.
Great. I can hear you loud and clear. And I also see Riley Callanan, who is a writer at our newsletter. And you may have read her breakdown of day one in our newsletter this morning. Riley, can we hear you?
Hey, everybody.
Great. Awesome, Riley. Well, thank you so much. That's the technical housekeeping. So welcome everyone to our X Space. And before I pass the microphone over to Evan to kick things off, just the usual housekeeping here on X. We want to have everybody involved in the conversation. So you can request to be a speaker and ask a question during the Q&A by requesting to become a speaker. And then once I give you that privilege, you can raise your hand using the little icon that looks like a heart with a plus sign. Now, this platform is not without glitches, as we all know. So if you send a request and you feel like it hasn't gone through, please just try again. And we are at the DNC on the ground all week. So make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter to get daily analysis. You can get that at g0media.com/subscribe. We've got expert video dispatches from Eurasia Group's John Lieber, who you might recognize from our US Politics in 60 Seconds series. We've got another X Space coming up to wrap up the week, and we've got a special G0 World episode with Ian Bremmer, so we've just got lots of great content. So please do stick with us throughout the week. And with that, I will hand over the microphone to Evan to kick things off.
Thank you, Emily. Emily's in charge of our social media. So if you have any social media questions, or maybe you don't like anything, just fire away at Emily and she'll answer fully transparently and get at it. Welcome, everyone. I am Sleepy Evan today because it was late last night that they finally got to Joe Biden, well out of prime time, even in Chicago time. Joe Biden, who at one point said he won't do events after 8, did the Joe Biden late night tour last night. And he had to accomplish a number of things. He had to explain why he decided not to run again. He had to unify the party and boost Kamala Harris. And he had to, of course, burnish his record. It was a night that included so many speakers, we lost count. Everyone from Steve Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, who had just come back from the Olympics, who had won championships in that same Chicago building when he played with Michael Jordan, supporting Kamala Harris, to Hillary Clinton, who was back on stage after losing to Donald Trump and gave a rousing speech. You heard from Jill Biden and you heard from lots of different people. Maybe AOC had the barn burner speech of the night, but it was a lot of speeches. So the questions are, what's the impact of this? Is there a long-term impact? What are we learning about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who were there last night? Kamala Harris made a short appearance. And we have to dissect the Joe Biden farewell as the page turns, even though he's got another 70 odd days, 78, 79 days left as till the election as the president. So I'm going to start with John Haltwanger. He's one of our writers. He's on the ground. He is in Chicago right now. John, give us your thoughts last night. First of all, overall impressions of what the mood there is like, what's it like in Chicago, and lead us up to the Biden night when he spoke. John.
Well, Chicago is an absolute madhouse right now. There is so much security in the city. There's police everywhere. Near the convention itself, which is in the United Center, there are fences up all around, just blocks away in Union Park. That's where protesters angry over the war in Gaza and U.S. support for Israel are gathering pretty much every day. I even saw a small encampment being built. And when I asked how long they planned on staying, they didn't want to give an answer. So, there's quite a juxtaposition between the mood outside and the mood inside. Inside, last night felt like a pep rally for the Democratic Party. We saw a lot of Democratic heavyweights from recent decades speak, like Hillary Clinton, Biden. In many ways, it seemed to be about paying tribute to their legacy, to how they've laid the groundwork for a candidate like Kamala Harris. It seemed more so about celebrating them than really laying out a specific vision for the future. Biden's speech, I thought notably, actually didn't mention Kamala that much. It was really heavily focused on what he's done as president. But it was also his opportunity to say goodbye to the party after decades, half a century in public service. The arena did get quite sleepy towards the end before Biden came up, but he was really fired up. He got the crowd riled up, and it was interesting that with the pressure of not being the nominee off, Biden did have some slip ups, but he kind of took it tongue in cheek. He made fun of himself. He said, I'm not your problem anymore. When he stumbled over the word electoral, he kind of just smirked at the audience and everyone laughed. So he had some fun with it too. But it was, of course, an emotional affair. He walked onto the stage, hugged his daughter, and was wiping away tears. So it'll be really interesting to see how today plays out and whether it'll be more about, well, where do we go from here? The theme for today is a bold vision for the future. Kamala Harris herself is actually not even in town. Her and Tim Walz have gone off to Milwaukee for a campaign event and convention watch party. So today I'll be watching out for more protests because they're planned throughout the week. So far, they have not been too disruptive of the convention. And I'll also be watching out to see whether the party focuses more on policy today rather than what it's already accomplished. So in terms of what are we looking to do moving forward and how does our agenda compare to former President Donald Trump's?
John Haltwanger on the ground in Chicago at the DNC, and he's one of our writers at G0. I'm Evan Solomon, the publisher of G0 Media. Check us out at g0media.com. You can subscribe free to all our newsletters, 8 newsletters, including our Wednesday edition by Ian Bremmer, who is our founder, of course. You can catch Ian and our team every week on PBS around the world at G0 World. Check out the program, the podcast, and online. It's all free. So that's great. John, thanks for that. I slightly disagree with you on how little he mentioned Kamala Harris. I actually thought he seamlessly kind of became a booster and wove in her name throughout that speech, but it was his moment. And I actually thought it was generous. I didn't think, did he have energy? Yes. He didn't seem a happy warrior. He seemed stern and he seemed at times almost angry, but I think Alex Gibson is there too. Alex Gibson produces the G0 World Show. Gibby, you're there in Chicago, which is your hometown. Your thoughts on last night leading up to Biden. And again, I thought verging on disrespectful to have Biden that late in the night, well past prime time. Too many speakers. He's there on the Monday anyway. That was a little bad not to have him in prime time, frankly. But what was your sense?
Yeah, I think to that point, I'm not sure how much it worries Dems that he was sort of the midnight hour, late show.
Gibby,
Want to move on
hold
from
on. You're breaking up. Is anyone else? I think you're breaking up. Try again if you can, Gibby. Again, we're Alec Gibson. He's also
I'm
at the
sorry.
convention in Chicago. Go ahead, Gibby.
Let me move around.
This is what it's like at the convention, folks. You're listening to the G0 Media Live X Space.
All right, guys.
Try that, Gibby.
Nothing.
All right. Yeah. Okay. You know what we're going to do, Gibby?
I guess it's my mic.
Yeah.
1 second.
Gibby, why don't you take a break? Why don't we mute Gibby and we'll come back to you.
Am I coming in any better right now? Hello?
Yeah, we're just going to.
Sorry, guys.
We're just going to mute Gibby there if you can. And because of that.
Yeah, no problem.
And let me bring in, Gibby, let's come back to you. Let me bring in Lindsay. Lindsay, you watched last night, your impression of what was accomplished and what needed to be accomplished and what was accomplished last night. Lindsay.
Thanks, Evan. If I can, I'd like to thread the needle between what you said and what John said about Biden's appearance. It felt to me like Biden gave the speech he would have given had he been accepting the nomination. I mean, he certainly did add in Aunt Kamala as though she was there and in the room, for all of his perceived accomplishments, his administration's accomplishments. But it did feel like he was giving his would-be acceptance speech. I would also say, to your point, what really struck me was how different the tone is between his campaign, what his campaign was, which we saw again encapsulated in his late night speech, and what the Harris campaign tone has attempted to bring to the table. And it was really it's a stark difference. You saw, as you said, a bit of anger, a bit of fire. If we think about the last 18 months, the tone between Biden and Trump has really been this somber affair, this protracted discussion, debate about, who's the greater threat to democracy? Is it age? Is it the fact that, Trump is now a convicted felon? And Harris has sort of sidestepped all that and made it about the future and made it about looking forward. And so it was really striking to have this wrap up moment around Biden where he was sort of still very well appreciated in the room, but perhaps maybe not reading the tenor and tone of where the room has shifted. And so in that sense, I think we saw, to your question, what needed to be accomplished is that while I'm still skeptical about whether this is Kamala Harris's party, her political party going forward, it is certainly the messaging from Harris's campaign that is taken by storm. And it's going to be a big test. This convention represents a big test. We will certainly expect to see more enthusiasm and energy coming out of the convention over the next couple of days, especially as the Obamas are going to speak tonight. And, we saw Hillary Clinton last night, Bill Clinton's coming up ahead. But how Harris is able to hold together the party, including in the face of certain, difficult issues like John was alluding to with outside the convention center, there's protest movements going on, and how she really uses this convention to begin the final push to November is what I'll be watching for.
Yeah, Lindsay, I agree. There's about 3 B's here that they had to accomplish. The Biden B, like say goodbye to Joe Biden and have, unity there, building a brand for Kamala Harris. Who is she? Telling her story. They're starting to do that, and then building a campaign and a message that they can carry forward in the next under 80 days. Gibby, you're back. Let's try you again.
All right, let's try real quick, and then I'll give up. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Excellent. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to speak to one very specific vibe. By the way, can you still hear me fine?
Gibby, we'll tell you if we can't. Go for it.
Okay, all right. There was a very specific vibe being there. You have to remember, this is the first real convention since 2016 that the Democrats have had. And especially after, Biden dropping out, there was this sort of new lease on life feeling, almost like Democrats had a near-death experience, right? And you could feel that energy, both good, but also a bit manic in the arena itself. I think that there's an irrepressible joy, but also a tinge of desperation to it, where Democrats and their followers think, okay, we actually have a shot at this, but also know how close they've come to essentially handing the election to Trump. So it was a specific flavor of excitement that I had never experienced, and then magnified by just huge crowds and huge energy, and that's something that I'm looking forward to following over the course of the coming days with John as we immerse ourselves in the weird and also the emotional of this convention.
Thank Gibby. Great. I appreciate that. I'm Evan Solomon. This is the G0 Media X Space on the DNC. I thought Hillary Clinton and maybe Tony and Riley can weigh in on this. Hillary Clinton, who lost to Donald Trump, as we all know. And she spoke, I thought, for her very well. It was clearly a moment she'd been waiting a long time. I mean, this is the third time the Democrats have run against Donald Trump. They were chanting, lock him up, lock him up. She didn't stop it. She seemed to marinate it in it, Tony. Is she a net positive at this point for the Dems? Does she help unify the party, uncork enthusiasm, or does she increase polarization? Tony?
Well, look, I think there's a reason why she spoke on Monday night and not on Wednesday or Thursday. First of all, I think that it's probably a bittersweet moment for her, as well as for her core supporters. I mean, 2016 still stings and rankles a bit, right? But the one thing that I wanted to point out as being a very key difference in messaging, whether it be the Hillary Clinton campaign or what we've seen from Trump and Biden versus the first night, at least, of the DNC, is that Kamala Harris and almost everyone who spoke on her behalf kept using the word we and you, and it takes all of you to make this happen, as opposed to this sort of single person coming in as a savior. Hillary Clinton's campaign slogan was, I'm with her, not Hillary saying, I'm for all of you. And Donald Trump and Joe Biden have made it very much about each other, right? As though only one of them, from whichever their viewpoint, is the person who can single-handedly save democracy. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this message resonates. And you even heard from President Biden and from others last night, Kamala and Tim are going to do this. And then, Kamala's brief remarks thanking everyone in the room and saying it's about all of you. And I just wonder how that might be a turning point for both the Democrats, but also this campaign in general.
Great points. Riley Callahan, one of our G0 writers, what your take on last night, and I don't want to pigeonhole you, Riley, because your analysis is great, but we each come from different perspectives on this. Not that we're in little boxes, but one of the constituencies Joe Biden had a lot of trouble unlocking, frankly, was young people and the enthusiasm for young people. And Kamala Harris does not seem to have that issue. Young people seem to have come back, and that enthusiasm in that constituency offset slightly by the Gaza issue outside that John mentioned earlier. But what was your sense of last night and how it played out?
Absolutely. I think that young people were screaming, give us another option. We don't want these two old guys again. And this is not the future that we want to see our political system going towards. And I think that in giving young people a third option with Kamala Harris, for young people that would be leaning towards her or towards the Democrats otherwise, already did a lot to regain momentum. Harris's campaign, to its own credit, has done a lot to kindle that fire with embracing Kamala as brat, and her social media team is spot on. My applaud to whatever Gen Zer they got to run their Instagram and their TikTok account. So I think that they've done a great job of reaching out. And then I think that was really amplified last night. There was a big feeling of amplifying younger voices, moving on to a newer generation, that baton being passed, whether it was AOC getting a keynote speech or them also inviting influencers to the campaign for the first time. The social media coverage of the campaign has been great from a lot of different angles for that. I think the Democratic Party is doing a great job of answering young people's calls of we want a new era to be at the forefront.
I thought, and I'll go back to you, John. I thought they really obviously kicked on, focused on some salient issues. Obviously, the abortion issue with some of those young people testifying was absolutely powerful. The woman who was horrifically raped by her father, as she said, the homecoming queen. It was heartbreaking to see that. Obviously, the abortion issue salient. They had obviously the UAW there. The unions, big part of Joe Biden's life, and they really, obviously, that's a big issue in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania. So the union issue. So they touched on all that. What does that tell you about what the party's going to look like under Kamala Harris, John?
Well, I think it tells us that Democrats think these are their strongest issues heading towards Election Day. They know that women are livid over the rolling back of reproductive rights and access, that they are concerned that these rights will be further infringed upon by a second Trump administration and by the Supreme Court, which consists of several justices that were appointed by Trump. And I think that the party also really wants to, once again, define itself as the party of the working class. There was a lot of talk last night about how, it's ridiculous that a billionaire who lives in kind of a gilded castle in the sky has tried to present himself as a friend to the working class. AOC, in particular, really leaned into that. I think we're going to continue to see that today. Bernie Sanders is set to speak tonight, and he's going to talk about
John, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but what does it tell you that the high profile or not of AOC and Bernie Sanders? Is that a sign that, she's trying to stitch together the party, but that side of the Democratic Party is in a bit of an ascendance now?
I would say so. I mean, the Democratic Party's platform since 2016 has gotten progressively more, no pun intended, progressively more progressive. They've moved to the left even more. And a lot of people would credit Bernie Sanders for that, given the popularity of his campaign with young people, with independent voters in both 2016 and 2020. So I think it speaks to the fact that the party now recognizes we've got to bring these people in. We really need to make sure that we are appealing to any voters who might be on the fence, and sending a clear message that we hear you. We want to move the country in the direction that you want. And that we are really the party of the working class, and that the Republican Party doesn't have your best interest at heart.
I'm intrigued by that. And maybe, Lindsay, you can jump in on that. Is there a danger of moving too far to the left? By the way, one of the notes for me was when Joe Biden was speaking about the bipartisan bill to have border security at the southern border, which the Republicans killed, got a very tepid response. Like in that crowd, cracking down on the border was not an issue that enthused the crowd at all. What does that tell us again about, is this going to be a centrist kind of, if you look at what's happened with Keir Starmer as he veered Labor towards the center and away from the more farther left element of that party in England, what's Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's, post Joe Biden doing?
Thanks, Evan. I'm a bit skeptical that they're going to move too far left. I think Biden's problem was he kept toggling between the center and the left, and trying to widen out the umbrella that way. And I think what Harris's campaign is going to want to try to do is just sidestep the whole issue and say, look, we're moving forward. We're about the future. Her economic policy that she outlined on Friday focused on the opportunity economy, talking about how they're really honing in on the middle class as Trump focuses in on the wealthy. And I think that's going to be what they're going to attempt to do. Now, what's going to be tricky is what happens after the convention and after Labor Day, when all eyes really tune in on the race quite closely, when we have these opportunities for potentially for Harris and Trump to debate. And what we saw come out over the last day is that Harris has said, for example, that she's going to back Biden's policy around corporate taxes at 28%. And we know Trump, of course, is trying to move from 20, down to 15%, moving the other direction. So these points of policy differentiation, including this one that she's apparently come out quite strongly around, are going to make it maybe a bit of a wrinkle, potentially challenging for her to sort of gloss over the whole progressive versus centrist wing. But I think that's the intention, is to try to speak to everybody and their pocketbooks through this middle class moving forward lens.
Yeah, really interesting. I don't know if Riley or Tony or Gibby wants to weigh in on that. I'm Evan Solomon. You're listening to the G0 Media X Space with John Haltwanger. He's our writer on the ground in Chicago, alongside Alex Gibson of our TV show G0 World. We've got lots of our team here. Lindsay Newman, one of our columnists that you can read in our newsletters, which you can subscribe to for free at g0media.com. If any of you want to chat, we're coming up to about 11:30. We'll take some questions. So just put up your hand and jump right in. What you think of the DNC, what it's accomplishing. Is this going to have a material difference on the campaign for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? How Donald Trump is going to have to respond to this? Is there going to be a permanent campaign bounce? What kind of party is it? Are we going to get any protein on the policies on that? Tony, any sense of yet, outside of what Lindsay's just mentioning, and John, what kind of party Kamala Harris, from a policy point of view? Again, she's been pretty darn light on policy so far, which because they're still in the define who I am stage of the campaign.
Well, look, I mean, I think that
who are they going to be
with this sort of limited runway, right? This is one of the shortest U.S. presidential campaigns in modern history. There's not going to be that much of a chance for her to articulate in great detail every policy position. And of course, there's still swirling criticism about her not doing any major interviews. And when in fact we're going to hear more of, as Lindsay mentioned, of course, she rolled out an economic plan that some might say was a little light on specific details, and even had some elements of it that were really opened her up to criticism, like combating price gouging with price capping, which is really not practical.
To be fair, I don't think she's price capping, by the way. She doesn't. I read that proposal. I want folks to know it's not well defined. I totally agree with you, but she is not talking about price controls like the Nixon 1970s and 1971 Nixon. She is talking about anti-gouging laws, which many states have already. But I agree with you. There's not a lot of meat on the bones to really taste what it's going to be like. Go ahead, Tony.
No, but that being said, she has already chipped away at a thin lead that Donald Trump had over Joe Biden about people trusting his ability to handle the economy, right? So she's heading in the right way in the vibe economy, for sure. And, look, in national polling, she comes into this convention in a very, very tight race, but slightly ahead in most polls. Now, that being said, at this point in 2020, Joe Biden was further ahead. He was 6 or 7 points ahead, not 2 or 3. So she's got a lot of ground to make up, but she will get, as most candidates do, a bounce after the convention. And then it really remains to be seen what happens in the coming months. And by the way, don't forget, the debate is coming. Kamala Harris is going to stand on stage with Donald Trump, and that's going to be a very defining moment.
Riley, did you want to jump in? Riley Callanan, one of our writers.
Yeah, I think one particular thing I wanted to point out was, since reproductive rights and the abortion issue took such center stage last night, I thought it was interesting how they handled it. Whereas they could have been leaning further in making it a women's issue, while it is a rallying cry for female voters, I think Democrats have also seen how it can be a motivating issue for all Democrats, and they're really leaning into that by having a lot of the women were up there with their husbands. The one survivor that you mentioned, Evan, her story was very based upon human rights, and I think that it speaks to how Harris is shaping a campaign that, while it is evident that she is a woman, she has the possibility of being the first female president. That's not what she's making it about. in contrast to maybe how Hillary
Yeah.
Clinton ran her campaign in 2016.
By the way, I totally agree with you. I thought that I think that's a real contrast. Let me go back to John. If you have questions, folks, jump in, and we'd love to hear your questions and comments. John, what's fascinating to me is all the criticism of Kamala Harris as a vice president. Who is she? She was invisible. It's kind of helping her now because she's got to find that tricky balance between continuing and burnishing and defending the legacy of Joe Biden, but offering change. And the fact that she was kind of an invisible VP, which had been a deep criticism, may actually inadvertently be helping her in the same way that, in a sense, Joe Biden bombing his debate with Donald Trump, probably the best thing to happen to the Democrats. If he had been 25% better, he sticks around, and the Democrats basically have to hitch their wagon to Biden, but he bombs so badly they push him out. She's so invisible. It's almost like she can define herself. And obviously Trump's trying to define her now. It hasn't worked yet. But how is she trying to define herself? How is that going? Who is she?
I think you make a lot of great points here. She kind of has a blank slate to work with. I found it really interesting how before Biden dropped out, when everyone was, thinking about, well, who might replace him? It can't be Kamala. Her approval ratings are so low, and she's barely done anything as vice president. But then once it happened, the party coalesced behind her. Her polling numbers started to shoot up. She started to catch up with Trump in swing states. And I think a lot of it really has to do with what we've been talking here is they're kind of running on vibes right now. They're running on this excitement of the future of nominating a woman of color for the first time in history on a major party ticket. We're seeing, in the arena last night, people got really excited when there was a video played with Beyonce overlaid over it. We're seeing I saw a lot of young people there last night who seem extremely excited about this week and about this candidacy. So I think she's trying to define herself, to your point, as, sure, I'm going to build off of the Biden administration and its accomplishments, but I'm also me. I'm Kamala. I'm going to take a different approach. And while Biden does seem, to your point, you made some of these points earlier, Biden does seem kind of stuck in the past in a lot of things. I mean, he even mentioned Vietnam last night, and some of the younger people sitting nearby me kind of chuckled. I think Kamala wants to look to the future. And I think that we're going to continue to see her lean heavily on that theme and on being a young, fresh face for the party and a new direction for the party at a time when a lot of people kind of view the U.S. as a gerontocracy led by the elderly. She's saying, look, I'm taking the party by the reins, and this signifies a new era, not just for the party, but for the U.S.
First of all, 5 points for that $7 word, gerontocracy. That's John Halterwanger, like just dropping the big words on day 2 of the DNC convention from Chicago. And we got the Barack Obama, Michelle Obama speaking today. So they're bringing out, and Bill Clinton is going to be speaking. So the Dems are not hiding from their past. So, trying to project the future by getting the entire sort of last 25 years of the Democratic Party on there is going to be an interesting turn. Gibby, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think to that point, don't underestimate the power of relief, right? I think there was a real sense in that room last night of being unencumbered. And, talking about reproductive rights, we have to remember Joe Biden is an 82-year-old Catholic, right? And he's pro-choice, but personally, he has very conservative or Catholic beliefs, and that was always a tough line for him to walk. Kamala Harris doesn't have that problem, and on some of the big, high-profile issues, from Afghanistan withdrawal to even around the economy, the fact that Kamala Harris has been kept, on the back burner means that she doesn't have to answer, a lot of those criticisms. So she is in a unique position where she's able to ride the wave of, I have the trust of the party, everyone coalesced behind me. But like we've all been saying here, we don't really know who she is. And so much of this convention is about defining her in contrast to Biden. So the sooner they can get Biden out of the way, and the sooner they can link her to the Obamas and the Beyoncés and, all the things that Democratic followers, sort of like about the party and the culture, the better. I just think the
Yeah,
power of relief.
so celebrity endorsement, I'm always slightly skeptical of it. I see James Taylor's going to be there. I remember standing beside Jesse Jackson, who was in a wheelchair last night. I saw him, but I was standing beside him in Boston at the John Kerry headquarters when Kerry lost. I remember James Taylor playing this desultory concert. Oh my God, it was so depressing. Even though however much you like his music, the Democrats were like in the rain losing, and he's back again. So they're trying to turn that table. But let me bring in Lindsay again.
Well, just one real quick point to that, Evan. I think
Yeah.
you're right, but also the power of culture is really something that the Democrats control, right? I mean, this is a very divided country, but when it comes to, key, music artists, when it comes to key entertainment figures, they do have a reach that politicians can't quite grasp, and the Democrats have always had an edge there. So we'll
Yeah,
see
they
what
do,
influence that
although
has.
they're different tribes there now, right? The Republicans welcomed Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock. They have a constituency and Alex Clement, one of our writers, and I talk about this a lot, that really divides, frankly, along gender lines, right? So both sides are now bringing that cultural punch to the conventions. They certainly did it at the RNC.
Absolutely.
If I might just hop in very quickly, I want to say that in terms of the different tone that Kamala's setting, I think, Evan, you spoke about this last night. I mean, regarding last night in Biden's speech. Biden did sound very angry. Anytime he referenced Trump and veterans, Trump and comments on his son, he also once again leaned into that theme of Trump being a threat to democracy, which I just don't think landed with most voters. Whereas, with the Harris Waltz ticket, they're leaning into this whole, they're weirdos, and people are laughing at that. There's a bit more fun. They're having a bit more fun with this campaign than the Biden campaign had. And I think that's resonating with a lot of voters who feel really down on politics after the last 10 years of chaos. They want to feel hopeful. They don't want to just be told everything's really bleak. Well, we know that. We know everything's really bleak. We've lived through it. We want to hear about how things can be better. And I think that that's what they're trying to lean into. And it'll be interesting to see if they keep doing that over the course of this week.
Yeah, Biden ditched his happy warrior pose. Tim Walz has the happy warrior pose now. He was not a happy warrior last night, Joe Biden. Lindsay, let me swing to you, and we'll drill down on the protests and the situation in Gaza, which is, as this was happening, Biden had his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, really saying we're close. Israel has agreed to a ceasefire, he said. Hamas is not yet, but they may be on the verge of some 6-week ceasefire. How important is that issue to have some movement on that, not just for Biden's legacy, frankly, but more importantly at this point, for Kamala Harris and the Democrats to try to tamp down what are going to be very material and disruptive protests? Lindsay.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, a couple of things. The first is, exactly as you say, we, in a sense, I don't want to speak with hyperbole, but we find ourselves in sort of as precarious a moment as any that we found ourselves in this conflict. If we zoom out to the wider context, we have Iran not yet responding to the recent assassinations of senior leadership for Hezbollah and for Hamas. We have a terrorist attack over the weekend in Tel Aviv. Today, Israel has announced that they've recovered bodies of 6 dead hostages. And of course, there's the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Secretary of State Blinken seems to be saying this is the last best effort to avoid a regional escalation. And Bibi has said that he for the first time, they made an official statement supporting the U.S. proposal. And Blinken has said that Israel has accepted this bridging proposal, although details are not yet have not been made public. But just on that specifically, we've been here quite a few times over the last 10 months, and there's a lot of, the negotiators are not speaking to each other directly. Hamas and Israeli negotiators are not speaking to each other directly, and there is a lot of noise coming out of both camps. So I don't think that we're there yet. In terms of what it means for the US election, thus far, I mean, it's very interesting. It's what we've all been saying. Thus far, Harris has seemed to be able to sort of sidestep the brunt of the frustration and anger that Biden felt over the last several months. And there's been this goodwill because from the beginning there was this messaging that and this belief that Harris was there was daylight between Harris and Biden on Israel Gaza, that she was more concerned about the Gaza humanitarian crisis, that she really wanted to push for the ceasefire. And that seemed to have gained a lot of traction for her and with the progressive crowd, that a lot of the ire has not been directed her way. And so it's outside of the DNC, and we know that they took this decision to have a special meeting within the DNC, which is the first time pro-Palestinian organization has sort of gotten that airtime. But again, as we look post Labor Day, and as we see everybody going back to school, and you and we're all reading about how there's already plans for further encampments and protests to be expected on these campuses. This isn't going to be something she's going to easily dodge going forward.
You are listening to the G0X space on the DNC. Man, it's interesting. I kind of want to bring in Matt Kendrick, Matt. I don't know if you can.
I'm here, Evan.
Yeah,
ready to serve.
Yeah, and I just want our folks to know. So Matt's just come off a very difficult. He was on jury duty for a very, I don't know what I could even say, but it was a.
You can tell everything. It's public now. It was a double homicide and kidnapping case here in DC.
Right. So double homicide kidnapping case. Matt's been seconded in this gruesome case, and the verdict's out, so now he can talk. It's interesting to contrast. A friend of mine was just on a jury, and he also follows politics, and he said, we always hear so much about divisiveness in American politics all over the world. But he said, when he was part of a jury recently, he said it was really, it burnished his faith in random Americans getting together to work together towards something. And he said, I don't know why we don't talk about that more in politics. The system really works because people are very serious about their civic duties. Can you refract, I know this sounds a little out there, a bit of what you're seeing in the political sphere with very quickly your experience as a juror in a double homicide?
It's interesting your friend said that because I had the exact same experience. I came away feeling really faithful in the integrity of our justice system after this, particularly because my fellow jurors who came from all walks of life all over DC and were aged from, I was one of the youngest folks there, but there was a guy who just graduated high school all the way up to retired folks of every ethnic background, some who had just moved to DC, some who had been here for quite a long time. And the vibe in that room was really serious about justice, really serious about the truth. And we deliberated after hearing about 3 weeks of pretty intense evidence. We deliberated for about 3 days. And I felt like we gave the defendants every due process, every due consideration. And I was really happy to see that. I was worried folks might be rushing through it. They might, in this case, both of the defendants were African American. I was, of course, worried that there might be folks who express bias against young African American men who are accused of committing a murder. In this case, we did find them guilty of 15 counts of related to the homicides. But I was worried about that, and I didn't see any of that. It was so interesting that our system ultimately puts the fate of these two people accused of a very serious crime in the hands of ordinary citizens, none of whom are, lawyers or justices or have really anything to do with the criminal justice system. And yet I'm confident we came to the right decision. And I think that we did the right thing when we ultimately, yeah.
But interesting that put faith in. No one's got faith in the system, it seems, right now. And yet, when you're right in the guts of it, when people's lives are on the line, it actually restores faith in it, which I don't know if that's being reflected right now in a political campaign, Matt.
I don't think it necessarily is, and I also think that it speaks to, You know what I found is that this was the first time in a long time where I was just had sitting in a room with a bunch of people I didn't know and had nothing other to do than to speak to them and get to know them and hear about their lives. And there's been a lot written about the death of third spaces in America, right? Where in the past you might go to a club or a bar or like some sort of social church, that some kind of thing, you know, in the 50s, 60s, where your primary purpose there was to socialize and catch the news. And we've moved into such isolation. I think that it's difficult sometimes to find yourself in a room with strangers who come from very different backgrounds and have an open conversation with them, particularly one where, I mean, we didn't really talk about politics. You know, we really just talked about our like interesting stories, anecdotes. We couldn't talk about the case while it was ongoing, and I don't think that we really have as many opportunities to get together with folks in our community and just relate as human beings as we should have for a healthy society.
Matt Kendrick running for office and seeing the light side of a horrific double homicide kidnapping case. Thanks, Matt. But like part of the space is we got to talk normally as citizens, right? Like this is
Yeah.
ultimately about where we live and what kind of world we want. Alex Clement is on. He's another one of our writers on our G0 Media team. Again, if you have a question, we're going to come to the end in about 10 minutes here. So I want to get wrap-up thoughts of what to look for from our guests and what they're looking for next and the biggest kicker. But one of the issues in this campaign is gender. Democrats over-index on suburban women, the abortion issue. Women vote for Democrats in significantly higher numbers than they do for Republicans. And men, it's the reverse. I wrote an article this last week in G0 about the masculinity issue. I think it was after the Elon Musk, Donald Trump X space. But that's a real issue, and maybe Clement, you can jump in on this because we've spoken a bit about this. The challenge for Democrats at one point was to make sure, like in the midterms, they fired up the suburban women base based on the salience of the abortion issue. But they got to finally start attracting working class men. And I think that's why you saw the unions there last night. And the Republicans have got to find a way to connect with women. And I don't think J.D. Vance's childless cat ladies meme has helped them in any way, shape, or form, but that's certainly a challenge. How impactful are those gender lines in this short campaign? If Alex Clement can talk.
I'm here.
Yeah, go for it, Clement.
Yeah, I think it's an immensely important issue. I mean, it's been a subtext for a lot of the kind of shifts that we've seen in party allegiance over the past 8 years. You talk about it's sort of fun, from a historical perspective, it's sort of funny to hear the Democratic Party needs to attract working class men. I mean, that is a sentence that would not have made sense to anybody 50 years ago, as recently as 20 years ago, right? But, the more that this election becomes, as elections have been doing, about sort of culture wars and perceptions of identity, you really are seeing this kind of divide in which the Republicans are trying to code themselves as the sort of party of alpha masculinity, traditional masculinity under attack by sort of liberal woke scolds and such. And the Democrats are painting themselves as a party of liberty, but in particular on this question of abortion, freedom of choice, liberation for women to act and be as they please, right? And so it's really like a subtle coding that's under a lot of what's going on. And when you look at, we talk about some of the other demographics, the Latino vote is increasingly swinging towards Trump, the Black vote swinging towards Trump. What we're really talking about is the men, and particularly the men without college degrees in those sub-demographics that are moving towards the Republican Party. So I think that really is, and this feeds into this other stuff about, low birth rates and what kinds of family policy should be pursued by either party, feeds into the immigration thing. I mean, it's all of that. And I just think it's an interesting thing to watch. And we talked about this yesterday, and Evan, I think you made the point that the ceiling for Republicans on attracting the female vote may be much lower than the Democrats' ceiling on attracting more of the male vote. Right? There's a lot of lot of Republican women, but the message they're putting out is not necessarily one that's going to increase that. Whereas the Democrats seem to, at this moment, have a possibility of attracting more of that kind of working class male vote. And I think that's part of why they chose Tim Walz, who is this unique sort of mixture of, flannel shirt wearing, gun loving, ice fishing, grandpa from the Midwest, but who also supports, gender non-specific bathrooms, and is very, has some of the progressive ideals that the party is also about. So that, I think that's partly what that was about. But this gender thing, I just think can't be focused on enough. I think it's the key to a lot of what's happening in this election and in the culture wars generally in America right now.
That's Alex. I don't think Walz is a grandfather yet, by the way. I don't. Am I wrong? I don't think Hope has had a kid. But okay, let's go around the horn here. We're just heading into day 2 of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where John Halterwanger, Alex Gibson, John Lieber, by the way, who does our videos, US in 60, is also about to be on the ground today. So we'll have lots more perspectives as Emily said at the beginning of this X space. We'll do another one early Friday morning. What are you looking for now? Obviously, today the Obamas are going to be on, but we're heading towards Thursday where Kamala Harris is. Let's look a little broader. First at the convention, what are you looking for? And then broadly, what impact will this have in reframing the race or not? And let's start with John Halterwanger on the ground here. John.
Yeah, so I found it interesting how the protests that are happening outside of the convention center, they haven't disrupted it in a major way yet, but they're still being felt. AOC mentioned Gaza. Biden mentioned the protesters themselves. He said they have a point. A lot of innocent people are dying on both sides. I'm curious to see how these demonstrations continue to influence what we're hearing from the speakers. Because this issue is not something that voters have cited as, a top priority. Foreign policy rarely is at the top of the list of concerns for U.S. voters. And even though Gaza is probably the biggest story in the world right now, that continues to be true. So I think Democrats are trying to walk a fine line between addressing it, but not, giving it too much oxygen. So I'm going to continue to pay attention to that. I'm also just curious about how, whether this entire event will simply be about vibes, or we're going to get down to the nitty gritty of policy, and whether it really helps Kamala Harris sustain the pretty impressive momentum that we've seen from her campaign since she jumped in, less than a month ago. Biden dropped out on July 21st. It's August 20th. It may seem like a lot longer. It has not been a long time, but she raised more than double Trump in July. She's caught up with him in a number of key swing states. Can she sustain this momentum? Will the convention help her, or will it kind of just be this intra-party pep rally that doesn't really have any ripples across the country? I'm definitely going to be paying attention to that in the days to come.
Yeah, I wonder if she thinks policy's getting in the way of the vibe, and the vibe's working, but I still think she needs more policy. Gibby, here we are in our G0X space. You're in Chicago. What are you looking for the rest of the convention and how it might impact the campaign?
I'm going to be really interested to see how race comes up, especially tonight. We've talked a lot about how Kamala Harris is running this joyful campaign. And I think a big part of that is because she doesn't have another choice, right? And we're going to hear tonight from Michelle Obama, who learned the hard way, the nation's fear of an angry black woman, everything up to the size of her biceps, right? So, you've got a situation now where you have a black woman leading a ticket. Is she going to stick with this joyful message at a time where things are so precarious? As Lindsay said, this has never been a more scary election than this one coming up. Is Tim Walz going to step in and elicit some of that anger? We saw an angry Biden last night. I don't think we could ever see a Kamala Harris that angry. I think that the repercussions culturally would be too severe. So, I think tonight with the Obamas headlining, race is going to be a very interesting dynamic to follow.
Gibby, great points, earning your living there on that stuff. Lindsay Newman.
Thanks, Evan. I just want to shout back to what John said at the start, which really struck me, this idea of this near-death experience. And it just strikes that Harris is meeting the moment. And I'm really near term very interested in the Obama speaking tonight. It feels very resonant to how Barack Obama met the moment with his rhetoric in around hope, and that seems to be what Harris is trying to also navigate. I have to say two quick things on policy. The first, and I put this in my column today that's out on G0, they did not update the party. The Democrats did not update the party platform, even though before they released it, even though there was this switch from Biden to Harris. That's very telling about the role of policy in Harris's campaign. I had read an article saying that she doesn't even have a policy area on her website. I just checked it while we were on. In fact, she does not have a policy area on her website. I think that, that's going to be come under pressure post convention. And one last thing, I'm really intrigued by what the Taylor Swift of it all. Do we see Taylor, not this week, but do we see her putting her toe into any of this political, into the political conversation?
You mean, of course, outside of the fact that she's already openly endorsed Donald Trump on AI in a completely fraudulent account, a fictional account that Donald Trump retweeted. Outside of that role, yes, the Swifties may weigh in here. Let me go to Tony. Tony, what are you looking for? I'm also, Tony, if you want to add a little tincture to this, to use another fancy word, maybe how Trump is going to respond to this. He's been on his back foot for about a month since his convention, and how maybe he's watching this and thinking, okay, we gotta figure this out. Now, just real quick, I'd say on the bad side, he looks reactive and he's tweeting out or true socialing out some of the craziest things I've ever seen. On the other hand, for all the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris and the diminishment of Donald Trump, it's neck and neck race. So it's not like she's pulled ahead that much.
No, that's right. I mean, she has closed the gap, to give her some credit, over what we were seeing from the Biden campaign. But what I think is the most ironic bit of critique that's coming from the Trump camp right now is that Kamala Harris is just a continuation. She was responsible. She was there in the room for all these horrible decisions they think the Biden administration made. But before Joe Biden dropped out, the criticism against her was that she was a do nothing, know nothing, right? So you kind of can't have it both ways in your messaging. She either was kind of a feckless, pushed aside figurehead, or she was the mastermind behind some of this. And I think that's going to be hard for him to sort of grapple with. We saw some of that last night. He still, by the way, seems incredibly angry that Joe Biden is not the person he's running against, calling this a coup on Truth Social as the convention was getting underway. What I would say for the rest of the week and then moving forward, I think Monday night was by far going to be the biggest kumbaya moment between Biden and Harris that we're going to see for the next 2.5 months. I think she has to find a way to differentiate herself a bit. I think the convention will continue to be feel good. I think the points that Lindsay and others have made about, she's not there yet on being able to get really specific on some policies. That's going to have to come, certainly in the debate. But then once we leave Chicago, the next, President Biden is president for the next 5 months, but it's really the 2.5 that are right upon us that matter the most to her. And she will be on the campaign trail and he will be in the White House, and she is going to have to start to explain where she's different, because that's where the criticism will come at her, particularly from Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see the policy come and emerge as well. Who have I missed here? Gibby's hand still up, but I think you've already had your crack there. Clement, did you want to have a last word before we go?
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, Riley Callanan. Riley, what you go first. Riley.
Thank you. I mostly wanted to respond to Lindsay's comment about Taylor Swift. In my Taylor Swift tea leaves, I would say that she will not endorse Kamala Harris. This will stay out of the political moment, but we shall see. In what I'm watching for the rest of the convention, I'm really looking forward to Harris's speech on Thursday. I think a lot of people are going to introduce her throughout the week and paint a picture of her, but I think what really matters is how she introduces herself and how she threads all of these needles on such a big stage. I think that's going to be our first real sign of whether she can keep up this momentum that she has at this moment. But that is to say, to answer your second question, I don't think that this convention thus far has changed how I view the race. I think back to the RNC just 3 weeks ago, and I see almost identical energies in a party that feels like they have the upper hand, feels like they have momentum. And we watched how the Republicans got the rug pulled out from under them, and the tables seem to have turned in the Democrats' direction very quickly. But I feel like the lesson in that is that there's still a long way to go before November, and anything can happen. And the question is whether Harris can keep up her momentum.
Yeah, as someone quoted that saying, Democrats win all the elections that happen in August. None of them do. You're right. The Republicans had the momentum a little while ago, and it could shift. J.D. Vance looked like a great choice for the Republicans until he didn't. We don't know if that's going to happen to Tim Walz as well. You've got the Middle East situation. You've got the economy situation. The stock market's been up and down like a yo-yo. You've got what's going on in Ukraine. There's lots going on. Clement, last word to you.
Yeah, my original answer was going to be how does Trump respond to this, but Tony nailed that. So let me say, I'm curious to see who this DNC ends up being for, right? If we get a convention bump, as they usually do, I'm curious to know if that's going to come from Democrats who were not going to vote and are now going to vote, whether it's from independents who are truly on the fence. I find it extremely hard to believe that there's a large number of Americans at this point who are truly undecided voters, but there may be a couple and enough to swing some key states, or whether it's coming from moderate Republicans who Harris can somehow pick off. I have my doubts, but that's what I'm looking for. Let's look at the numbers a week or two from now and see whom this actually was for, and that'll give us a sense of where the highest ceiling is for the Democrats to try and pull this thing off.
All right, we've hit our mark here. We're on the ground live in Chicago, the G0 team of John Haltwanger. We've got Alex Gibson there. We've got John Lieber. We've got others on the ground there. So please follow our coverage here at G0 Media. You can follow it on all our social channels, on YouTube, on Insta, here on X. You can subscribe to our 8 free newsletters on geopolitics. They're nonpartisan, they're free. We've got one on AI, one on US, Canada. We've got 5 on global politics in the US. We've got Ian Bremmer's Wednesday edition that Ian writes. Catch our G0 World television show every weekend on PBS. We've got lots of live events. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Obviously, John and Gibby in Chicago, Matt, Tony, Alex, Riley, and Lindsay all around the world here giving us some perspective on that. Matt, welcome back from your jury duty. And all of you for joining us. Look, we love to get your feedback on stuff, on our coverage. We try to be fair, candid. I'm really looking forward to seeing, obviously, who Kamala Harris proves to be. Before, could she make this transition? It's been an almost perfect first phase 1 of the campaign, but the enthusiasm levels are so high. Can she keep it? Can she live up to this hype now? Her speech will be really, really important Thursday. How she delivers it and what she says, I think will be very critical to see what kind of bounce she gets. And then I'm with Tony and Alex, how Trump will recalibrate his attacks. And then the debate looms extremely large. So we'll have more Twitter spaces on this, or X spaces as they're called. I'm going to throw it back to Emily McPhee, who's our social media director. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with this campaign. It's fantastic, and I hope all of you are as well. So thanks, everyone. Emily, back to you.
Thanks, Evan, and thank you, everybody, for the thoughtful discussion, and thanks, everybody who tuned in, being here with us. As always, I love our community. I love when we get together and unpack this stuff. And as Evan said, after Kamala Harris's all-important speech on Thursday night, we'll be back Friday morning with another X Space to unpack that big moment. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all then. And until then, I will see you on social media and in our newsletters. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.